Morning, everybody. Welcome back. I'm going to carry on reading Journey to the River Sea. Moz wanted to invite Edgar back today, so I hope that's okay with everybody. Edgar's up there waiting to hear the second half. Now, Mozzie has filled him in on what's happened so far, so don't worry, he does know what's going on. So I read the first half of chapter 7 yesterday, so I'm going to read the rest of chapter 7 now. Okay? Thank you. Right, several days had passed since the disaster of the matinee, and in the Hotel Paradiso things were going badly. The Goodleys had called a meeting in their bedroom to decide what to do, but as usual they started by nagging Clovis. "You'd think that you could have waited another week before you started honking like an old grandfather," said Mrs. Goodley. "You realise you've turned us into a laughingstock," said Nancy Goodley. "After all we've done for you, making you into a star." Clovis hung his head. He was crouched on a dirty footstool, clutching his stomach, which was heaving after the Paradiso breakfast of bean stew and fish bones, and he was covered in bites because the hotel sheets were crawling with bed bugs. It was his fault, he knew that, and now even more things were going wrong. A banana boat had come in from Belem the night before, and the captain had told the manager of the Paradiso that the company had left there without paying their hotel bill. Since then, the manager shot out of his office whenever any of the actors came past, asking for money and threatening to take their clothes and belongings if they didn't pay. They tried to put on a funny play that Mr. Goodley had written instead of Fauntleroy, but it wasn't funny, and it had to be pulled out. And now, not only the hotel, but the theatre was losing money, and the management was threatening to cancel the second week of their booking. They were due to go on to Colombia and Peru, but how? "Perhaps we could steal out of the hotel one by one at night and hire a lorry," suggested an old actor with flashing teeth. "Hire a lorry with what?" sneered Mr. Goodley. "Pebbles? Coconut shells?" Clovis stopped listening. He felt as wretched as he'd ever done, and frightened too. What was going to happen to him and everyone? He could see himself staring into the dark pit of the theatre and listening to that awful tittering that had started everyone off. Two girls, high-pitched and cruel. One thing was certain, no one was going to let him get on stage again. Only Maya was still his friend. She'd promised to help him. She'd said there was something they could do, and he trusted Maya as he trusted no one else. The loud, angry voices crashed over his head. The room was sweltering. A centipede fell from the ceiling at his feet. Downstairs, someone opened a door, and the smell of dreaded bean stew came up and hit him. He couldn't face it again. He couldn't face any of it. Then suddenly he sat up very straight. He didn't have to face it now that there wasn't acting anymore. He knew where Maya lived, and Miss Minton, a few miles up the river to the north. The twins would like to see him. Maya had said on the boat, and Clovis saw them now, welcoming and kind. Yes, that's what he'd do. He'd go and find Maya. He had a few coins still. Someone had taken him up the river, and once he was with Maya and Miss Minton, everything would be all right. They would help him to get home. Maya and Miss Minton could do anything. Miss Minton's afternoon off fell 2 days later. She was going into Manaus, and Maya hoped she would ask her to go with her, but she didn't. She was going to see if there was a reply yet from Mr. Murray, but after that she had business to attend to, she said. Since the Carters were going into the town to visit the only family in Manaus with whom they were still on speaking terms, they could hardly help offering her a place in the launch. "Where is Furo?" asked Mrs. Carter as one of the other Indians waited by the boat. "Sick," said the man, letting his knees go soft and miming a fever. "Oh, really, they are impossible, these people," said Mrs. Carter angrily. "The slightest thing and they stay off work." Maya waved them off. Then she went into the sitting room and opened the piano. It was almost impossible to practice when the Carters were at home. She started on her scales, her arpeggios, but sooner than she should have done, she began to play the Chopin ballad she'd been learning in London. She was so absorbed that at first she didn't see Furo beckoning to her outside the window. He didn't seem to be the least bit sick. He looked, in fact, rather pleased and excited. "Come," he said, making signs that she was to be quiet. Maya followed him. She was puzzled. During the day, the Indians always ignored her. It was only at night when they showed their true selves. Tapy and old Lila were standing at the door of their hut smiling, but they said nothing, and Maya followed Furo to the creek she'd found on the day she tried to go into Manaus. By the wooden bridge, a shabby dugout was moored. It was the one Furo used to go fishing in the evening. "In," he said, holding out a hand. She hesitated only for a moment, then obeyed him. They travelled down a number of twisting rivers. Sometimes Maya thought she'd been there before. Sometimes everything looked different. Whenever she tried to question Furo, he shook his head. but he went on looking pleased. No one could have been more different from the surly boatman who had brought them to the Carters in the first place. They paddled down a side stream, and now Maya did feel uneasy, because Fioro took out a square piece of cloth, put it over his own eyes to show her what she was to do, then over Maya's. "Put on," he said, and when she shook her head, repeated it, leaning forward to tie the blindfold over her eyes. She began to be frightened. The boat eased slowly forward. She heard rushes making a dry sound against the side of the canoe, felt branches brushing her arm, then the boat surged forward, and Fioro leant forward to unbind her eyes. They were in a still lagoon of clear blue water, shielded from the outside by a ring of great trees. The only entrance, the passage through the rushes, seemed to have closed behind them. They might have been alone in the world. But it was not the secrecy of the lake that held Maya spellbound. It was its beauty. The sheltering trees leant over the water. There was a bank of golden sand on which a turtle slept, untroubled by the boat. Clumps of yellow and pink lotus flowers swayed in the water, their buds open to the sun. Hummingbirds clustered in an ever-changing whirl of colour round a feeding bottle nailed to a branch. On the far side of the lagoon, in the shade of the two big cottonwoods, was a neatly built wooden hut, and in front of it a narrow wooden jetty built out over the lake. A small launch with a raked smokestack and the letters Arabella painted on the side rode at anchor nearby, and made fast alongside was a canoe which Maya recognised. But she did not at first recognise the boy who stood outside the hut, quietly waiting. He seemed to be the Indian boy who had taken her to Manaus, but his jet black hair had gone, and so had the headband and the red paint. With his own fine brown hair, he looked like any European boy who had lived a long time in the sun. Except that he didn't. He looked like no boy Maya had ever seen, standing so still, not waving or shouting instructions, just being there. And the dog who stood beside him was like other dogs too. A thin dog, the colour of dark sand. He knew when to bark and when to be silent, and as the punt drew up alongside the wooden platform, he permitted himself only half a wave of his tail. The boy stretched out his hand and Maya jumped out. "I've decided to trust you," he said in English. She'd known really before he spoke. Now she was sure. Maya looked into his eyes. "You can do that," she said seriously. "I wouldn't betray you to the crows, not for the world." "The crows, yes, that's the right name for them. So you know who I am?" "You're Bernard Taverner's son, the boy who Professor Glastonbury said didn't exist, but I don't know your first name. It's Finn, and you're Maya, and you sing beautifully. You don't like beetroot and sums." Maya stared at him. "How do you know all that?" "The Indians tell me. They see everything. Old Lila used to be my nurse when I was a baby. I go and talk to them sometimes. At least I used to before the crows came, but only at night. The Carters have never seen me, and they never will." His voice, when he spoke of the Carters, was suddenly full of hatred. "It was you then," said Maya. "It was you who whistled 'Blow the Wind Southerly' the first night I came. It was such a comfort." Finn turned and said a few quick words to Fioro in his own language. "He'll fetch you in a couple of hours," he said. "Come on, I'll show you everything. And then I'll tell you why I sent for you." He grinned and pulled himself up. "I mean, why I wanted you to come." When Fioro disappeared through the narrow channel of rushes, the silence seemed overwhelming. Yet she heard the noise of the water lapping the Arabella, the whir of the hummingbird's wings, the dog yawning. It was as though sounds had been freshly invented in this secret place. Finn led her to the door of the hut. "My father built it, and we lived here whenever we weren't away on collecting trips. I still can't believe he isn't coming back, though it's 4 months since he was drowned." "Do you see him sometimes?" Maya asked, and he turned sharply because she seemed to have read his thoughts. "I see mine, my father, not a ghost or an apparition, just him." "Yes, it's exactly like that. Often he's showing me something, a new insect or a plant." "Mine shows me things too, little bits of pottery, shards. He was an archaeologist." "Mine was a naturalist. He collected over 100 new species. I know, I saw some of the things in the museum. You must be very proud of him." "Yes, maybe that's the point of fathers. They're people that show you things." The hut was just as Bernard Taverner had left it when he went out with an Indian friend to look for the blue water lily, whose leaves were used as a painkiller. His collecting boxes and specimen jars, His plant press and dissecting kit and microscope were all stacked neatly on his work table. His carpentry tools were hung carefully on the wooden wall. On the other side of the hut was a tackle for the boat. The khaki sheet lay still folded on his hammock as though he expected to return to sleep that night. And in shelves made from palm wood planks were rows of old books. Books on natural history, books on exploration, and all the well-known classics. But the book that lay open on the table with a marker was Caesar's Gaelic Wars in Latin. And as he looked at it, Finn sighed. He made me promise to go on with Latin, whatever happened. He said there was nothing like it for sharpening in the mind, but it's difficult on one's own. Yes, Maya nodded. Everything's difficult on one's own. But she thought she'd never seen a place like she liked more. The hut was spotlessly clean, with a slight smell of wood smoke and the watery scent of the reeds coming in through the window. There was a small oil stove and a sink, but she could see that mostly the boy cooked outside on the stone fireplace built on a spit of land that ran between the hut and the sandbank. You must have been very happy here, you and your father. Yes, we were. I used to wake up every morning and think, here I am, exactly where I want to be. And there aren't many boys who can say that. I thought of waking up in those awful English boarding schools with a bell shrilling. He took her outside and showed her his oven, the place where the turtles laid their eggs, the bottle full of sugared water that he filled every day for the hummingbirds, just as his father had done. We've had 20 different kinds on that one tree, he said. His bow and arrow were hung on the branch, but she'd seen a rifle too, propped under the windowsill. Do you see that? He said, pointed to some marks in the sand. That's an anteater. He comes down at night to drink. His father had planted a simple garden, maize and a few sweet potatoes protected by a wire fence. It's difficult, keeping the animals out and keeping it weeded. It all looks fine, all of it. She waved her hand over the hut, the boat, the lagoon. It looked like a place where one would want to stay forever and ever. He gave her a startled glance. Yes, but I can't stay. I'm going on a journey. Oh. For a moment she was devastated. She'd only just met him and now he was going away. I'm going to find the Kanti. She waited. They're my mother's tribe. She was Indian. My father brought her here and she died when I was born. I promised him that if anything happened to him, I'd go there. He said they'd keep me safe until I was of age and then no one could make me go back to Westwood. I thought he was making a fuss, but now the crows have come. How will you go? In the Arabella, as soon as the dry season starts properly. The rivers in the north are still flooded now, but it won't be long. They clambered over the boat together, and it was clear that she was the apple of his eye. She was a steam launch, rakish and sturdy, with a tall copper funnel and an awning running the length of her deck. My father got her cheap from the rubber baron who'd gone bankrupt. She can do 5 knots when she's in a good mood. Can you manage her on your own? Just about. You have to have a lot of wood chopped at the beginning of the day, and then you go on pretty steadily. It'd be difficult because there aren't any reliable maps for the last part of the journey. I'll have to go by what my father remembered. Maya put her hand on the tiller. 5 minutes ago she had wanted to stay in the lagoon forever. Now, just as much, she wanted to make this journey with Finn, to go on and up the unknown rivers, not getting there, just going. But now the dog, who had been following them silently, jumped back ashore and made his way to the door of the hut, which he pushed open with his snout. He's telling us it's time for afternoon tea. Maya looked at him to see if he was joking, but he wasn't. Afternoon tea was exactly what Finn now produced. He put on the kettle, warmed the teapot, took down a tea caddy and measured out 3 spoonfuls of Earl Grey. Then he found a plate, filled it with biscuits, proper ones with sultanas and raisins, and put out the sugar tongs and the milk jug. He even handed her a napkin. They might have been in any British drawing room. The dog waited. He only drinks China tea, said Finn, putting down a saucer and adding a spoonful of sugar. If you give him anything else, he looks at you. While they ate and drank, he made polite conversation, asking her how she liked Manaus and whether her friend was still upset about the play. Clovis, do you mean? Well, yes, he is, but how do you know everything? He shrugged. The Indians here, and they tell me. Their cleaner in the theatre is old Lila's cousin. When they'd finished, they swirled out the cups. He said, Right, I suppose I better explain. I think I might need your help, you see. Maya looked at him, flushed with pleasure. I'll do anything. Just like that, he asked, even though I'm on the run. Yes. Finn grinned. They said you weren't like the porkers. The porkers? That's what the Indians call the twins, you know, the fat little pigs that snuffle and eat. Maya tried to look shocked and failed. Are they as bad as people say? He asked. Maya sighed and stopped trying to be good. Yes, she said, it would be lovely if they were pigs. One could get really fond of pigs. We'll go outside, said Finn. The mosquitoes are fairly quiet at this hour. So they sat side by side on the wooden deck outside the hut, and Finn told her the story of his father's marriage. When he came out here, my father was just 17. He'd been absolutely wretched in England, but as soon as he came out here, he knew it was the place for him. At first, he had no money or anything, but he found he could live by collecting plants and berries people needed for medicines and selling them to the traders in Manaus. He made friends with the Indians and learnt their languages, and they taught him their skills. For nearly 10 years, he lived like that, exploring the rivers, building his hut. The awful memories of England only bothered him at night when he was dreaming. He was sure he had gotten away. Finn was silent, looking out over the lake. Then one day, he went a very long way, not in the Arabella, in the canoe, and fell ill with a fever, one of the really awful ones, and he passed out. When he came round, he was with the Canti. He'd heard of them. They were supposed to be special, very gentle and full of knowledge about healing, but they were very shy and mostly stayed hidden. Not many people had seen them. He said waking up there was like waking up in paradise. The kind, quiet people, the dappled trees. One girl in particular nursed him, and her name was Yara, and when he was better, the Canti let her marry him, which was an honour. He brought her back here, but when I was due to be born, the English doctor wouldn't come out to an Indian woman in the night, and she died. He paused. After that, he didn't have much to do with his own people. He found Lila to nurse me, and we got on all right, though I think he never got over my mother's death. But we were good friends. His voice faltered for a moment. I can stay here and live as he did, finding medicines, selling stuff to museums, lots of things. But he said if anyone came for me from England, I was to fight for my life, and I was to go back to the Canti. He never went back himself, but he said the tribe would know me, and he turned his wrist to show her the marks she had noticed in the canoe. The trouble is, I've got to get away without being seen, and the crows seem to be everywhere, and no one knows how long they're going to stay and hunt around. The Indians won't give me away, but it's a big reward they're offering, and there are people in Manaus who are very poor. You said perhaps I could help you. Yes, I've got an idea, but I don't know if it'll work. He pulled the dog closer and began to scratch his ear. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, she said quickly. I'll help you anyway. It isn't that, it's just I haven't thought out the details yet. And anyway, it doesn't depend only on me. What I'd like you to do is tell me about your friend, about Clovis. Where did you meet him? What's he like? So Maya told him about meeting Clovis on the boat, how homesick he was and how upset he'd been about his voice breaking. All he wants to do is get back to England. He says he's going to stow away. It won't work. They search the boats with a fine tooth comb. People keep trying to smuggle out rubber seedlings so they can grow them somewhere else, which would kill the rubber trade here. He's sure to be caught. That's what Miss Minton says. Ah, Miss Minton. What does she think of Clovis? Well, I think she likes him. Yes, I'm sure she does. He does cry rather a lot, but he's very decent. Well, I suppose he would be if he's your friend. They sat for a while in companionable silence. Then Finn said, You don't happen to know Miss Minton's Christian name? Maya screwed up her face, thinking. She never uses it, but it begins with an A, I think, because she'd lent me her handkerchief in the cab and there was an A embroidered in the corner. Finn nodded. Good, he said. I thought it might be. Furo's canoe now appeared through the reeds, and Maya said quickly, What I don't understand is how they can make you go back to Westwood. You're only a child. They don't lock up children in prisons. Finn slapped a mosquito on his arm. They do at Westwood. At Westwood, they lock you up as soon as you're born. That's the end of chapter 7. Quite like that chapter. It's I love how they describe the lagoon where Finn lives. And actually, what I was wondering was if any of you wanted to listen to this again and try and kind of imagine it and maybe draw a picture of what you think the lagoon looks like. Obviously, you don't have to, but if you fancied it, and then take a picture of it and email it into the office, and they can email it over to me and I can have a little look, because I know what I imagine with the lagoon. I can see it in my head, with the hut on the other side and everything else, but it would be interesting to see what your thoughts were. So, obviously, today is Friday, and I'll upload this later. Next week and the week after is when the Easter holidays would obviously be. And so we're not setting you any work, obviously. it's your holiday time. However, I was thinking that it might be quite nice to carry on with this. Now, obviously, you don't have to listen to me read if you don't want to, but I'll probably do it once every other day. So I'll upload one on Monday, and then on Wednesday, and then on Friday probably, if that's all right. Just so it gives you a bit of a break, but also you kind of keep up to date with what's going on with the story as well. And that way, as soon as we get it finished, we can read another one, can't we? So have a think about what you might want the next book to be as well, because I'm going to ask for some recommendations. Anyway, right, that's it. So chapter 8 will be on Monday, and I hope you're all having a lovely day, and you've had a good week, and you're keeping busy, and you're staying safe, and you're looking after each other, because that's the most important thing, isn't it? And I will see you soon. Lots of love.